Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Stephen Fortuna, and this is the show where we bring together experts to really break down some of the most fundamental topics in HR. So this time we are talking about interview note taking, and I have some amazing panelists here with me today. We have Deborah Moreau, who is an HR business partner at PTI. We have Heather Anderson, human resource manager at SP Plus Corporation. Ryan Archibald, who is a people and culture leader, and Stephen Farber, the talent retention Sherpa. So great group here. Everybody wave. Everybody watching is excited to learn from each of you. And so am I. So let's dive right in here and talk about this subject, which is so tactical. It's really, it's fun to get into the weeds of like some very just like specific things people can work on. I feel like this is one of those. So taking notes during an interview. I want to start off with kind of a basic question, which is, what's the point? Why should we be taking notes during interviews? And Heather, I'd love if you could start us off on this one, and maybe Stephen can follow up, and if there's anyone else who has a thought they want to share. But what's the point?
You bet. What is the point? The point is that we do not have photographic memories. There are so many things that go on when you are interviewing candidates, and you want to be present, and they may say something that you want to come back on. So you have that jotted down. They may present mannerisms or signs that you just want to make note of that you may not remember later. But the ultimate reason is that you want a record of the interview. You want to be able to review it for your notes later, especially if you have multiple candidates for that. And you want to make sure that you're getting down your first impressions as you get them, because you're never going to remember them. So it's always good to have a record to go back and make sure that you can review it.
Perfect.
Stephen, to Heather's point, we're not going to remember it. In fact, I like to say if it's not written down, it never happened. At least that's true for me. And what's interesting is you use two types of intelligences. I think that's the right way to say it plurally, when you take notes. So if you're hearing somebody say something to you and you write it down, when you look at that as it's being written down, you'll actually pick that information back up with a different part of your brain. And that helps you consider it from a different angle. So when you're doing that with an interviewee, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to really examine all the information that you've got.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Great points. One question I kind of follow up here. Ryan, maybe you have some thoughts on this, and Deb as well. So there are a lot of different interviews you can do, right? Like you're screening people, then maybe you've got some follow up. Maybe you have like a 5th round interview with some candidate. I don't know, but there's a lot of different interviewing that happens. Should you be taking detailed notes at like every stage of this process, or are there ever times you just kind of take a step back and just sit there and just listen and talk to them?
Oh, it doesn't matter what stage it is, always have a record of what happened. Because ultimately, especially if you have 5 interviews back to back, it's happened to me. At the end of it, you're just like, I know I went through interviews, but in terms of scoring them, without that record, I can't accurately score each candidate and make an accurate decision on who should be moving forward. And especially when consulting with the hiring manager, they're like, so how did it go? It's like, well, with the notes, I can easily bring back key deliverables each candidate has made in past positions, and then make better recommendations for certain candidates.
Love it. Deb, anything you'd add to that?
So I love the point that Ryan brought up about multiple candidates. I think I'd like to chime in on the side of we've had positions where we've had multiple rounds of interviews with the same candidate. I do recommend that you take notes for each round. How detailed, for me personally, varies, right? So if I'm hiring for a very technical role, I'm taking less notes, but the notes I am taking are very strategic, focused on skills, focused on, manager's concerns or the level of education, where it's, the first screening process, you're mostly looking as an HR person cultural fit. You're looking at, is this person overselling their skills, right? Just from the general knowledge that I understand for what the manager is looking for in the job. So I think at each round, for me, it differs how much notes I'm taking.
Yeah. And Deb, I'd actually love if you could jump into your process a little bit deeper here and maybe share, and we can hear some others kind of what is your personal note-taking process, because I think you brought up a lot of good points there. But tell me about it. I mean, I almost wish you could like hold up a piece of paper right now. I'm sure that'd violate all
It'd be hard to read because I scribble. That's the first thing. I want to, it's easier if I recall an actual position. So let's use the, for example, project engineer role that we're hiring. We've hired and filled a few times. The first time I'm calling the candidate, I have basic questions that I'm just going through with the candidate, such as, is this a reasonable, is the location of the job a reasonable commute for you, right? Can you commit to this? This is an on-site job. It's not a hybrid position. So basic questions like that. I am looking into the education to make sure that it fits. That you can really just pick up from the resume. I do like to touch base on motivation. What motivated the candidate to look into our company, because we're a small company, right? What are they looking to achieve in this role that's different from the role that they're currently in or have, been in the past? So that's more the screening process. When they come on site, in the screening process, I'm also checking salary. It's very important. We don't want to waste anyone's time. So the second round, it varies. We can either do on-site or virtual. Lately, we've been doing a lot of virtual second rounds. At that point, the manager is there and really honing in on skills and discussing the type of projects that are here and trying to see if there's an alignment between what the candidate is stating that they're bringing to the table and what we're really looking for and need for the role. The third round, depending on the level of the job, the level of the position in terms of seniority, we'll probably have them come in and meet with the CFO or COO. He's really where the decision making stops, depending on the seniority of the role. Or the third role is just for the manager to meet the person in person and then give them a tour of where they'd be working from and kind of learn a little bit more. It's the third round is really for the manager to kind of see how would this work? How would this person fit with our team? At this company, we don't have, kind of like a round robin type of interview with the department or team interviewing the person. But we'll have, like, if it's a serious candidate, like a brief hello to the other team members that they'll probably be interacting with. And so, as I mentioned, for each round, it's different what I'm capturing. So the first round is mostly, is this even the right candidate, right? Second round is, okay, I thought this was the right candidate. How's the manager taking to this candidate? How's the candidate reacting to some of the challenging questions? So I'm taking notes, going back to what Heather said earlier about maybe some mannerisms, some responses, how detailed, how vague. And in the third round, really, I'm just more paying attention. Does the person seem displeased? Do they seem a little bit nervous? It's a manufacturing company, right? And so, as I mentioned, the level of note taking it differs from each stage.
Yeah, it sounds like at the end of all these stages, you really do have pages. Maybe the beginning, like you're saying, you're just checking salary, just saying. It sounds like a checkbox. Like, okay, they match the salary, they match this.
Yeah.
Then you have these pages by the end of the time that you actually hire them or not. Actually have a lot of information. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I want to open it up to the others here. Is there any? I mean, Ryan, maybe we can start with you. Tell me about your process of note taking is so interesting too. Maybe we should say record keeping, right? Like, what's your process of kind of like record keeping in these interviews, Ryan?
Yeah, well, Deb did a fantastic job going into detail on that. The only thing I would add is for those later interviews, I often take notes following the STAR interview format. I know it's often that the candidate will give answers in that, but especially for those behavioral questions, to really pinpoint what circumstance were they in, what action they took, and what was the result, it helps me score the candidates later on all that much easier. And also in the middle of it, if the candidate might leave out the result of that, then I can easily follow up and just say, hey, Stephen, after you took this action, what was the result? What happened when you coached that manager? What happened when you did that? That allows the candidate to better gives them their best chance of being considered for the role instead of just saying, oh, Stephen didn't give me a result, so I guess I can't really score him on that.
Yeah.
And Ryan, I've heard you use the word scoring a couple times now. Do you have kind of like a number that comes out at the end of these interviews based on these notes you're taking?
Oh, it usually depends on the company that I've worked for. But it ultimately depends on just the hiring manager. They just say, okay, rate these candidates 1 to 5. And I usually try and focus on anyone that's going to be the best fit for the company culturally with the company values, and leaving the technical aspects of the job to the hiring manager as well. And you mentioned I forgot to answer your question on record keeping. In terms of keeping notes, like how long do I keep them? I always keep them. I'm old school. I have a folder on my desktop with each position and all the interviews that I've had, especially if there's a candidate that ended up being a bad fit. The hiring manager's like, hey, what happened? Okay, let's go over the notes again. What did we see in this candidate that made us excited that maybe didn't come to fruition after we hired that person?
Yeah. Stephen or Heather, do either of you have some process things you want to add into kind of this conversation? How you like to take notes?
Oh, I got lots.
Go for it. Let's hear it.
So I have a generalist that works with me that she does a lot of my pre-screenings. The most critical thing with the note taking is you want to learn from your notes, especially like when I first started off in HR, I had done maybe 4 interviews as a manager, and I wasn't confident in my abilities. I wasn't confident with what I was looking for. And the more interviews you do, the more you learn. And those notes are absolutely critical to helping develop your skills as an interviewer, because let's face it, it's hard to find good training out there to interview people. There's a ton, if you're the one going into that interview, of what to expect, what to ask, what to be prepared for. But as an interviewer yourself, it is so hard. And we need to change that, by the way. Add that to our tallies of stuff we need to do. But it is really hard. So those notes are critical so that you can learn from them. What did you see? And review them with your senior leadership too. Say, hey, when I asked these questions, what's going on? And this is how I'm training my generalists is, so we do everything on the Google platform. I can talk. And she has copious amounts of notes with each interview that she does, and she saves them on a drive so that we can sit there and go through them and ask questions. Because let's face it, we work in parking. No one in the world comes in and says, I want to go into parking. So you have to find those skill sets that are transferable into the industry that you're in, especially if you're in those specialty industries where it's, entry level, they still need things. And so you want to be making sure that you're asking those questions and getting used to it. And you do that by your notes. So in that, and Deb laid it out beautifully, that first one, that first phone screen should absolutely have your top 5 must-haves. Like, we require CDLs. Do they have those? Do they have their driver's licenses? What are your must-haves for this role? Because if they don't have those, there's no point in moving forward with them. Is the pay going to be worth it? Is it the schedule? Is it going to be worth it?
Yes.
We work outside in the parking lots at the airport. Are they okay with that? Are they going to be able to be on their feet all day long? Are they going to be able to to meet those minimal requirements that we are looking for. And if you have any concerns about that whatsoever, it should be in your notes so that you can go back to your hiring manager and your managers, or they may ask you a question that you realize, oh, I have no idea. So you utilize those notes there to go back and learn more about the positions, learn more about the company. Every single interview, I try to learn something new.
Yeah.
Whether it be about the person, about their mannerisms, how they act, how they respond. And then even in evaluation, to Ryan's credit, like as an employee leaves, maybe they only lasted 2 or 3 weeks, and we go, it just doesn't make any sense. They interviewed so good. They were just awesome. You can go back to those notes to see if there's anything there that may have been able to give you that insight that maybe they just wouldn't be a good fit. And it is so critical, especially if you have to pass off those notes to other managers that maybe they weren't able to be there in the interview. Maybe they have further questions. Like, it's absolutely critical. And coming from a small location where we have a corporate office, we keep our records in our HRIS system. We have their resume, we have their hiring process, we have their actual application in there, and any emails we send them are saved in there, and a space for notes. So you can title it phone screen notes, title it interview notes, and you copy and paste, if you're taking it on another sheet or another doc or whatever it is. I always take my laptop in there and just pull it up right there and type them in if I'm in there myself, just so we have a record of what happened, because there are those times where you're just back to back to back to back to back and it's constant. You can't remember who said what. So those are phenomenal to go back in, evaluate, look at them, and it helps bring back how they felt. If they answered correctly, if there was something just off about them, that maybe we need to bring them in for a second interview just to clear up. But yeah, you want to make sure that those are as detailed as possible, calling out anything you're not sure about and reiterating things that you loved. That's huge. So many people focus on the negatives. And I saw this post on LinkedIn, and I don't remember who said it, but I absolutely loved it, where they stopped someone in an interview and said, stop apologizing. Like, they stopped them in their tracks and said, stop apologizing. And they wanted to focus more on the positives. What can you do? Because your resume obviously showed us that you could do the job, and it intrigued us enough to bring you in for an interview. Let's talk about your positives. What can you do? So make sure that you're emphasizing those positives, those transferable skills, so that way when you get asked, hey, why should we hire them? You can say, oh, let me tell you how awesome this candidate is. Here you go. And you have those positives, with acknowledging that there may be some opportunities for training and some opportunities to better them. But that just shows the candidate you're invested in them and helps with retention in the long run.
Yeah. Lots of great points there, Heather. And I think it's in the notes where you can capture those specific details and those specific excitement that you can prove later and say, hey, we should bring this person on. I also just love your comments around using it as an opportunity for self-reflection and learning over time. I think that's really powerful too. But lots of good things there. I want to kind of dive deeper into a subject we've kind of skirted around here. And Stephen, I'd love if you could start us out on this one. But we've heard paper and files, we've heard HRIS, we've heard Google, the Google platform. So there's lots of different places where where each of you are taking notes. Let's talk about those physical places. Stephen, do you have any advice on where do you actually want to take these notes? And do you have any specific tools that you think are exceptionally helpful to these small businesses?
Absolutely. And I almost always have it with me, but I got this for my birthday a couple of years ago. It's called a Remarkable, and it's a digital tablet, feels just like pen to paper. So you get that brain connection of writing something down, but it is then saved on the cloud, and it integrates with Google, integrates with just about everything. Really, if you're taking notes for any reason, that is an amazing tool to have. I think they do work with businesses to kind of create special pricing for that. So that's my number one tool for everything. And it's great because you can then also share that with people who are using the same program, and it uploads to anywhere. So as far as tools, that would be my go-to. I'm also a super nerd, so I love the newest type of thing anyway. So again, I wish they would pay me for talking about them, but they're not. So. I've tried. They don't answer my emails anymore, but it is what it is. So yeah, that is a fantastic tool. Did you ask another question with that? I got carried away on the remarkable.
Oh no, that's the main one. I mean,
yeah,
it sounds like you're in for digital. Well, you kind of have this interesting, a technology where you can, it's both like analog and digital, where it will store it. So it feels like taking notes, but it's being saved forever. So that's pretty cool.
Well, if I could add one more thing, and again, this is just because I've dug in so much to figure out how do you retain information the best, and it really comes down to that connection between writing something down versus typing. At least in the studies that I've done, and I haven't done them, but I've researched a lot of them. They've just found that putting pen to paper, that physical action is better retained for you. And then I use something else called the SQ4R method. And I use kind of a neutered version of it, but it's a textbook study tool for people with ADHD, autism. I have ADHD as an adult, so I need all the help I can get. But I found that it's amazing for anybody, for any reason. And this would probably be more of a late process hiring manager type of tool. But if you're reading someone else's notes, especially reading them, saying them out loud, and then, or excuse me, I mixed that up. Reading them, writing down your version of what they said, and then saying it out loud will actually run through every part of your brain and give you, again, another perception on, rather the truest part of what they're saying. It really helps you retain that information. So I think that's a great tool to use if you're really trying to make sure you get the most out of what notes you even took or somebody else took too.
Yeah.
That's my piece. I'm step off the box now. So.
No, it's great. We've got a lot of remarkable fans in the chat here, including.
So you sold me.
So
yeah, all about it.
Mention me. Maybe they'll finally,
Yeah, we'll make it work.
Hashtag.
That's awesome. So I think that's a great piece of hardware people could invest in. Heather, you talked about your HRIS and Google. Ryan, I know you talked about paper and files, and I want to come back to you actually and learn a little bit more about how people can do that effectively. But Deb, I don't know if we have heard yet. Tell us about your format. Is it paper or how?
It's both. Yeah. So when I'm in an interview, I am taking notes. I'm writing it down on a manual piece of paper, right? But I am transposing it onto, we use our HRIS is Breezy HR. So we can add notes and we use a scorecard towards the end. So it saves everything from emails, as Heather mentioned. And you can see every team member scoring with their notes. So to your point, we're using both.
Cool. Awesome. Ryan, I'd love to hear about how can because not everyone can afford all these fancy tools, especially these small businesses. Talk to us about paper and files. How do you make sure that system works and stays around forever and is also accessible to people?
Yeah, accessible. I would say standardized interview questions first. That helps level the playing field for everyone. And just making sure the hiring managers have access to it.
Yeah.
Whether it's giving them a key to the cabinet, just saying, hey, these are your candidates. And that's really helpful if they're looking to promote someone, because then those interview notes can help them backfill the position. It's just hey, we promoted Heather. We need someone as awesome as Heather. Let's go back to her interview and see what kind of traits are we looking for? What kind of skills are we looking for? It's really just having that open dialogue with the hiring manager. Just says, hey, this is what I've got.
Yeah.
If you need it, or if you've got concerns about a certain employee that we've hired, let's go over their interview notes again and see where that gap is and see how can we best support this employee going forward.
And if I can add to that, at the very beginning, I didn't have a fancy HRIS system that I was familiar with. I was still learning. So, my VP gave me the one sheet of standardized questions that eventually I evolved in, but it was a great place to start. And I would ask those questions based on our conversation. So depending on what kind of interview you're going into, you'll start to feel, what are these questions going to help me achieve? And what am I going to learn from them? So see if you can get one of your senior leaders to sit in there with you. So as you're taking notes, you can compare your notes to theirs and help. But with the paper notes, I would make sure, one, I could read them afterwards. If I couldn't, then I'd make sure I'd put notes out, because you don't necessarily, like, those are your thoughts. That's your impression.
Mhm.
And you don't want to make the candidate feel uncomfortable
Yeah.
or, awkward or anything. So I would always take a bigger notepad and I would go to the further back page in my notepad. So I had a little bit of a buffer, and I would write in cursive just so
Mm.
that I could read them, because I'd be able to relay them later. But then I would print out any words that I was not sure could be legible later, or if someone had questions on them, and then I would staple it to their application. And I think, if memory serves me, you need to keep applications for at least a year.
Mhm.
So that way you can separate them in a filing cabinet based on job description that they're applying for, which I've done. Other times you can just put, based on, like, we're decided not to move forward with this candidate. So I'm going to put them in this file, and then you have a new file for every month, so you can constantly be rotating them out and being able to keep up with your record keeping.
Mhm.
But that way, in the event you have to go through them, there were many times that I had to sit there and dig through a stack like this big, trying to find one candidate's
Mhm.
name with, I'm like, I know they've applied here before. Where are they? Trying to find the notes that I took previously. So having them stapled to their application and in a drawer where I knew where they were at was substantially helpful in helping me dig it out and reviewing it and being like, oh yeah, that's why we chose not to. But that also kind of helped me with, well, if we're going to interview them again, I could ask about that, see if it's changed, maybe see if they've obtained that skill set, or if they've gotten better at this particular thing, and helped with that second interview. And sometimes we hired them, sometimes we didn't. But at least that way, it was an easy way to keep track of their application with their notes, making sure that it was, accurate and easy to find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to just jump in real quick and just mention something. Similar to Heather, before having an HRIS system, I worked at a far larger company. We had 2 buildings, and it was not always feasible to hand off a key for them to come to my office and look at notes. So sometimes just a quick summary via email helps as well, right? So, I mean, obviously, you want to be careful what you're writing down about a candidate. But sometimes just a quick blurb, and they can get to that physical note later, can help.
Yeah. So that's like you're digitizing it quickly via email, right? Bringing it down. Yeah, that's cool. But to your point, Deb, too, like you said, it's way easier to take notes on paper, right? As you're sitting there, and I see Ryan on his head as well. So like, there are some advantages to just get it on paper sometimes too. So, I want to touch on something that Heather briefly mentioned there, which is you don't want the candidate to feel uncomfortable. And I know I've been in interviews, and the person's either jotting away after I said something or typing on a computer and blank expression on their face, right? And you're like, I don't know what I just said. Hopefully it was something worth writing down and wasn't something bad, right? Steven, what would you recommend to like making people feel comfortable with being written about in front of them?
That's a great question, right? And there's certain personalities that really don't care, but most people are probably going to be like, oh, am I being judged? It's like when a police officer pulls you over and he starts writing down, I think I don't remember if it was from The Office, where you just pretend like you're writing down everything somebody says and they get really angry. And anyway, I'm ADHD, see, case in point. Sorry, what I would normally do is really just be authentic and honest with them and say, hey, I don't want you to take this notepad too seriously. I am going to be writing down my questions and your responses, but more than anything, it's because if I don't write it down, I'm not going to remember it very well. Your time is valuable, so I want to make sure that I have down everything that you brought to this interview today. So, and I think that's important to point it to them and say, hey, the fact that you're here, you're sitting in this chair or standing, whatever they're doing, and they're giving you that interview time, because it's just as much their time as yours. I think it's worth, I think it's deserved to write down what they're saying. And I would spin it that way. And I think that's probably the right way anyway. Just, hey, I really appreciate everything that you're going to say, so I'm going to make sure it's written down. And That's where I would go. I think most people are going to be fine with that. It's like asking someone's point of view. They're not going to really turn you down because people love to give information. An interview is the same thing. It's just if it moves on to the next step, we'll talk about hiring. But for now, let's just get down some of those nuggets of gold that you got, because you wouldn't be here if we didn't already find you a little bit interesting. So,
yeah, I think that's great. I think you framed that exactly in such a great way. Right, you're important enough to be about. Right? It's nice.
So that made me feel good, and you weren't even saying it to me. I was like, thank you. So.
Well, learn to be comfortable with silence too. Like, 'cause I've been in many interviews where they're like, just writing away and there's no verbiage, so it makes you feel kind of awkward. So I always like, if I'm wanting to update my notes, just be like, okay, like I'm just jotting down a couple things here before we move on to the next question. So that way they know what I'm doing, even though they can see what I'm doing. It's still nice to have that verbiage so that they don't just sit there in an awkward silence.
Yeah.
Smart. I like that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about after the note taking has finished. So it's in the HRIS, it's in the files, it's wherever it needs to be. I mean, what are you doing with those notes really after the interview is concluded? Ryan, I'd love if you could talk to us a little about this. I think you started to share a little bit about the way you share with the hiring manager, or maybe you're meeting with people, but I'd love to hear what your process is like with after the meeting's done. You have the notes. How do you use them?
Yeah, I'll echo what Heather said earlier about you got to keep them for, I think it's a year after up to that certain point. But ultimately, it's just for those circumstances where the employee leaves early, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, or maybe you're backfilling their position and you're looking at every data point within their life cycle before they either left or got promoted. And you're just saying, okay, what can we learn? And how can we either build upon that or make sure this mistake doesn't happen again? So making sure if it's the hiring manager needs access to it. I love Deb's idea about the email, just overlooking the summary at a high level. And if you need to go into detail, you've got the hard copy of the documented notes to really figure out what this employee experience was like for this individual.
I think you could flip that around too. If you have a really talented individual who didn't go with you, but you wish she wish they would have, and then maybe they come back and you want to win them over. If you mention how that first interview went, they're going to remember that you remembered, and that's just a really easy way to build rapport and definitely snag them that time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, Brian. Like, it's not just a 1-year requirement, but keeping them on file for longer allows you to have that data for longer, so you can go back and reference it and improve your employee experience. Like the word used there too.
Well, in the essence of employee retention, there are many interviews where, because a lot of them I find out start off with, tell me about yourself, or tell me something that's not on your resume. Who are you? And they'll start talking about themselves. So we would write down what their hobbies are, what they liked, what they didn't like. And it gave us ideas for appreciation days, ways that we could thank them that would be meaningful to them. Because, I mean, obviously companies always want to help, show their employees that they appreciate them. They want them to stay, that retention rate is there. But there are many times where I've gone back into their notes and been like, ooh, they said that they loved Starbucks, or they love Barnes and Noble. Like I'm obsessed with steak, like little things like I love to take my family out, right? Like little things like that, where it can give you ideas later on down the road of like, did we have anything in the notes to do something special for them, or maybe they mentioned something that triggers them or is a worry or a concern, potentially maybe leading up to maybe we need to take extra precaution as far as a disability goes, or maybe an allergy or something we need to be aware of to help make sure that their experience here at the workplace is a more comfortable one. All of that can potentially be in the notes if it's mentioned in the interview. Obviously, be careful about what you're asking, making sure that you're following all the proper protocols and laws and things like that. Um, but it's an awesome opportunity to get to know them as a person. And then how cool is that to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that they remembered that about me in my interview. I said it so quickly. And then have that company come back and be like, hey, we know you love Starbucks, or we know you love Barnes and Noble. So here's a gift card. You've done a great job. Thank you so much. And it just means so much more to them than just a regular thing.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah, please.
Just real fast. Just to Heather's point, I think everybody here would agree with this too. But like a big reason why people are leaving their companies are because of their managers, and it's because of recognition. That's a big one. Knowing from the interview process if an employee likes to be publicly or privately recognized is huge. So when you like some people are all about, give me that plaque, stand me up in front of everybody, I want people to know my name. Other people, they are not about. I'm one of those people. I if you're gonna tell me good job, tell me in an email. Don't let it. I don't want to create a big scene. If you do that, that goes miles for people. They love that you remembered not to embarrass them or to embarrass them if they're about it. So just little things in people's personalities that you can just get from interview. And I don't think that would even require a tough question. It's just like, when you're recognized, how do you like to be recognized? They'll be honest, like, don't recognize me, then do it privately. So.
Wow, well, you guys are making note-taking sound really exciting now. It's connected with personalizing the employee experience and swag and rewards and recognition. I love it. There's one kind of last major topic I want to cover together, at least with a few different thoughts here, and that is acknowledging the fact that HR professionals are not going to be doing all of the interviewing, maybe not even the majority of it. Right? It's going to be passed off to a manager or somebody who will be working with them. It's, so you could be an expert in interview note taking, and then you hand them off to somebody else for Deb, like you were saying, round 3 or whatever. And this person is terrible, and they come back, and you have no idea why they rejected the candidate or what the interview was like. Should we be standardizing this note-taking process across the whole company? That's kind of my question. How we would go about it. Deb, I'd love to if you could actually start this conversation off, because like you were describing in the beginning, you have so many rounds and people involved. How do you standardize, or do you? Do you think that's important at all?
I'm going to come from a personal philosophy. So my personal philosophy is that we must do interviews to figure out the person, to use our best and educated guess to see if this person fits this role. But I think more than one HR person can agree with me that the interview process doesn't really capture the person, right? And so you can interview someone, as Heather mentioned earlier, and they just interviewed so well, you connected with them, and then they get in the role and they do something that either character wise it makes you question their integrity, and you felt like you asked all the questions to get to the core of the type of person this would be. And so there is a limitation to interviews, right? And so I say that to say I've worked at 2 companies where legal counsel actually formalized our questions for us. Okay. And so everyone was asking the same questions. Now, obviously, some people went off script. That's the purpose of having an HR at this company. The protocol was HR to sit in on every interview, and there was only 1 round, right? If it was like a VP or an executive level, obviously there'd be 2 rounds. And so I've experienced that. And then I've worked at other companies where I was creating like a general training for managers just to understand questions to steer clear from, how to pivot with, certain responses, or having candidates share way too many information that you don't need, that could actually, get the company in trouble if we actually use some of the information they're sharing. So in my opinion, I think there's limitations to standardizing across the board for the company, right? I can understand why a company would decide to go in that direction, especially at the advice of legal counsel. But I think there's limitations in going in that direction. Either direction, there are pros and cons for it, and I hate to not have like a definitive answer here. I can tell you that currently at my company, we don't have standardized questions across the board. What I do is before the manager interviews the candidates that they're interested in, I'll sit down with them and kind of get an understanding of what they're looking for that's not on the job description, and then help them formulate questions for that role. So I hope that helped. I apologize if it was all over the place.
No, there's a lot of great. I think you presented the case really, really well for both sides, and but like highlighting really quick, you said that you've had trainings in the past for all your hiring managers on what is an interview supposed to be like, and you're meeting one-on-one with these people as well to help them put together a good interview. Hopefully, take good notes. Let's just have one more thought on this. Ryan, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add. What do you think about standardizing, especially the note taking? Because I know you mentioned like rubrics and things. Like, is it helpful to kind of have just a sheet that everyone uses or the same form everyone's using?
Yeah, if anything, just to avoid any legal trouble going down the line. At the very basic, it's the cognitive bias of trying to find someone who's just like me. The problem with that is you might be discriminating by a protected class without even knowing it.
Yes.
And then by the time you get down to the last few candidates, they might all be the same race, the same gender, and then you're going off track of finding someone for the position. You're finding your next best friend you can go to lunch with.
I like that.
So that's great. So having like a defined process, standardized across the company can really remove those biases. That's good. That's great. That was kind of the last big question, but I want to give each of you a moment just at the end here to share any last bits of advice, wisdom, encouragement you want to give to these HR pros who are looking to level up their note-taking and processes in interviewing. Heather, I'd love to start with you, and then Deb, Stephen, and Ryan, we'll give you the last word.
So my biggest suggestion would be go in prepared. Do your research. There are many times where I've been in an interview situation where I wish I had looked further into the candidate, or I've been pulled in last minute and wish I had had a time to be able to actually look through the candidate and ask questions. Really looking at their resume, looking at their application, so that way I know what questions I want to ask. If you have talked to your hiring managers and you know what they're looking for, research questions that are going to help you determine what kind of answers are you going to have. And Google is phenomenal. Look at Indeed, look at ZipRecruiter. They have blogs. I'm sure we've got some plenty on HR Mavericks where you can go in and say, hey, if I ask this question with their answer, what am I looking for? So that way you know what it is that you're trying to achieve with asking those questions. So don't just ask the questions all willy-nilly and take notes. You want to be able to know why you're asking that question and make sure you're taking appropriate notes for what you're looking for. Make sure you know what questions to avoid, or if they start going down a path, hey, we don't need to go down that path right now. Especially
Yes.
I don't know if Deb has this issue, but I worked in many I'm out at an airport. Like, there are certain things that you just can't have in a candidate that are requirements that also could conflict with the ban the box.
Yep.
So, it's like
Yep.
you can't necessarily ask questions that, but you can make statements of this is going to be a requirement. Do you have any questions or concerns about that? Make sure your phrasing is accurate. And if you have any questions about those, make sure that you ask either your HR professional or your senior leadership, or if you have an attorney there, make sure you ask those questions or reach out to the HR community. We love each other. We are the best community ever. I'm biased, but there's so many out there that will help you. So make sure that your notes are reflective of what you're looking for, and you have to know what you're looking for in order to be able to get to there.
Perfect, Heather. Be prepared. Love it. Deb, what about you? Last bits of wisdom for leveling up note taking.
I want to make sure that it's clear to any HR person or interviewer that you want to be present, and you want to remember that this is a person seeking a job to earn an honest living. An honest living, right? So it's important that you read their resume. I can't explain how many times a manager I'll witness come in asking questions about skills that are clearly listed in the resume. And so that's very important, that you it's part of the note-taking process as well. And it goes back to what Heather was saying about being prepared for an interview, right? And also you just don't want to duplicate your efforts taking notes on something that's clearly stated on the resume. So just be respectful of the person's time, and just be a human in the interview. As Heather mentioned, I've personally experienced interviews where the person just has a flat affect, they're not responding to you. It kind of unnerves you. Just be a person in that interview as well. So it are my last and final thoughts on that.
Be prepared, be a person. Stephen, can you give us another P for this?
Oh, okay. Well, since I was so prepared for that, I will do my best. No, I really like kind of what Deb said about the person in front of you, kind of making sure you are not, because we all have our own cognitive bias, right? And I would say first, whenever they're talking, make sure you're writing down what they're saying, how they're saying it, and don't be afraid to ask for clarification. Like myself, I'm very analytical minded. And if I have somebody just in there, like Deb, to your point, is just very deadpan, only responds when necessary, my opinion might leak into my note taking. Well, when they finally answer, they said this. It's like, no, just write down what they said, how they said it, because they may be an amazing fit for the job, but they may miss out because of our misinterpretation. So I think just write down exactly what they say, how they say it. And then when someone else gets eyes on it and then you get your eyes on it again, you'll be able to look at that better. So I'm just going to kind of copy what you said, Deb. Be a person, be in front of them. Be where your feet are, not where your head is. And,
I like that.
Yeah. I think I learned that from you. No. I learned that from somebody else just recently. But I did get to talk to Deb recently too. So she's a wealth of information now. So I hope I was helpful without the P here. Right on to you.
Great, Stephen. Ryan, we'll give you the last word on here. Bits of wisdom on leveling up your note taking.
Yeah, at the end of the interview, the tables turn. The candidates get to ask us interviews.
Yes.
You got to be okay with saying, you know what, I don't know. Yeah. Or let me follow up with that and then add that at the bottom. They might ask about the company's COVID response. How did you support each employee's health and well-being beyond just masks and hand sanitizer? And then you can go to the hiring manager or even the executive team. Just say, hey, we got this in an interview. Can you give me kind of high-level overview? What did you guys do? And then it's just a simple interview back to the candidate. Said, hey, I got with the leadership team. This was your question, and this is the answer that I got. Then that can help the candidate decide, okay, is this a company that I want to stick with if I get hired on, or maybe I should just pull out now?
Great advice. Thank you, all four of you. I want to quickly show this slide that I always show at the end of each of these conversations. If you want to learn more about interview note taking, we do have an article in our encyclopedia about it, along with about 15, 16 others around interviewing. Please go meet these panelists. These are amazing people. They know so much and they're so giving, and just really grateful to know each of them. So please connect with them on LinkedIn and wherever else you see them. Thank you to everyone who was watching, and thank you to you for being here. We hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.